Alright, for this part of the tutorial, I'll be covering JavaScript and setting up just the whole messaging system so you can send and receive messages through my Discord website. This is probably going to be the longest of the videos in this series. There's a lot to do in this video. I'll be introducing you to JavaScript in this video, but I'll be using JavaScript just for what I need it for. I won't be going through and teaching you everything about JavaScript because that's obviously out of the scope of this video. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction and then I'll just use whatever I need. This series is made assuming you already know Python, so what you know about Python should make it somewhat easy to understand what I'm doing with JavaScript, and you should be able to at least look at the code, mess around with it, and do some basic stuff. Anything else you need, it's really not hard to Google. In terms of actually being able to learn something, JavaScript is one of the things that there's the most resources for online. So it should be pretty easy for you to follow up on this tutorial and teach yourself more about JavaScript when you're done. So the first step here is going to be just to add JavaScript to my web page itself. So I'm going to start by making a messaging JavaScript file, so messaging.js. And in here, I'll just put console.log hello world. So this is the equivalent to printing in Python. In JavaScript, all statements end with a semicolon as well, so that's something to note, but it doesn't look too out of the ordinary. So yeah, this is essentially just printing. But now I need to actually run this. So I'll go over to this, and you could add JavaScript up here, but that's kind of inconvenient because then you have to add something in your JavaScript to make it wait to run until after the page is loaded. So it's a lot of times it's easier to put the JavaScript down here so that it runs after everything else is loaded. So I'll do script, and that's an opening tag. There's also a closing tag. You can do script. So you could actually write stuff in here. You could do console.log hello. And you can see that my editor even knows this is JavaScript, and it's highlighting it as if it were instead of it being HTML. So I'm actually going to link a file though, because that's a lot more convenient. So to link a file, first of all, I'm going to say that the type is text/JavaScript, and then I'm going to do src equals static messaging.js. And I'll move this end tag over here because there's nothing in between. So I've updated my messaging page layout, which is the layout for this page, and added the JavaScript file into here. So it essentially just takes the code that's in this file and inserts it inside this tag and runs it, which is this code. So now, since the script stuff is there, I just restart the server, flip over to here, refresh, and you don't see anything printed out now. But if you go into the console, when you inspect element, you inspect, and then you go console. This may vary a little bit depending on what browser you're using, but most of them are fairly similar. It's like inspect or inspect element and then console. So you can see it says hello world here, which is the thing I printed out. It even says it came from messaging.js, and you can actually click that and it'll take you over to that code. But there's also this error. You can ignore that. It's just the browser's automatically looking for an icon for the page. Anyways, so you can see that's running. So it ran that. It's time to actually start writing stuff that's useful. I'll teach you a bit about JavaScript as I go here. So the stuff I'm going to be doing with JavaScript here is I want a system where I can send messages, I can receive messages, and I can get a list of the channels. So if you look at our page here, you can see I've got a list of channels here, but these are hard-coded, and these aren't even the names of the channels. And actually, that's I forgot to remove that. It's supposed to be C1, but you'll see in a bit why that was there. It's because I pre-write my stuff and then copy it over so that I know it works. Anyways, so you can see there's channel names here which aren't even correct, because if you look at the stuff I've got written in the code, it's C1, C2, and not channel 1, channel 2. And then these are the messages here. These are also hard-coded. If you look, they're not the messages here. And if I type that and click send, nothing happens. If I press enter, nothing happens. And that's the stuff where you use JavaScript. JavaScript is useful for client-side scripting for web browsers. That's what its original purpose was, but some freaks out there decided to take JavaScript and make it also work on a server side as a standalone application using Node.js. You can actually make an end-to-end server and client and everything with just JavaScript. You don't need to be using Python, but it's kind of a pain, so I don't like that. But yeah, JavaScript was initially meant to be the scripting language for web browsers, so you can do fancy stuff with web pages and make things a bit more interactive. So JavaScript is capable of sending requests to servers and also, receiving data when it sends a request as well. So you can make either get or post requests. I believe I went over that earlier. There are also other types of requests, but I won't be going over those in this video. Something you should note is that JavaScript by default is not capable of sending requests to any server other than the same server that the web page is on. This is to avoid cross-site scripting attacks and stuff. It's just kind of a safety measure that's enforced in just about every single browser out there. Which means that if you want to contact another server, what you have to do is you put some JavaScript on the client that makes requests to your actual server, and then your server itself goes and accesses that other server you're looking for that's not the host server of the website, and then you send the data back through the server to the client. You can't go directly from the client to another server. But I'm not going to be dealing with a situation like that here. All the data I need will be within the host server, in my case, localhost. Or later in the tutorial, I'll probably put this code up onto an actual server to demonstrate how you would deploy something. I should also mention that most people, when they're doing front-end work like this, will be using JavaScript frameworks, which will deal with a lot of issues. You might see me run into a couple of them that you would run into when just doing front-end work for interactive websites. This tutorial series is more focused towards back-end people, so I'm not going to go into JavaScript frameworks, and I don't know any that well myself. It's just teaching you the fundamentals of web development, essentially. When you know how JavaScript works on this level, though, it's easier to pick up JavaScript frameworks afterwards. So anyways, like I said, there's 3 things that I want it to be able to do: send messages, receive messages, and get a list of channels. So all of those are going to require interaction with the server, and I'm going to set that up on the server side first. So let's go over to the code. I'm going to want to add 3 endpoints here for interactions from the client to the server. I'm going to call them app.root API channels, def API channels, pass, and then I'm going to do 2 more. So app.root API channel ID, def API channel ID, pass, and then 1 more, app.root API send message. This is the one that's going to be a post request. These ones you can just access normally. You can actually pull up the web page yourself in your browser, and then this one you actually have to send something to the server. Its purpose is for sending data. So API send message, and you wouldn't be able to pull this up in the web browser by itself. So I'm going to put that in pass, and to demonstrate, well, actually I can't demonstrate it yet. I gotta put in some stuff. So for the list of channels, this one's pretty easy. All I have to do is return JSON, and if JSONify channel, actually no, list channels. So list just creates a list out of any iterable object. So since when you iterate over a dictionary, it gives you just the keys, calling list on it will just take C1, C2, and just gets the names of the channels and puts it in a list. So I take that, and then I format that into JSON and return it, or yeah. For that, I'm going to actually have to import, JSONify from Flask. So with that, I should be able to visit that endpoint. So it should be API channels. No, where's the E? Channels. So you see C1 and C2, and this is formatted in JSON. I don't think I went over JSON before. It's basically just a data format. It's essentially just Python's lists and dictionaries. It's this exact format. There's some things you can do in Python that you can't do in JSON. Like, for example, tuples don't exist in JSON, and you can't set a tuple to the key either, obviously. You can't store like fancy objects in there. It can only deal with like primitive types, so booleans, so true, false. It can also do none. It can do numbers, and it can do strings. It also supports lists, so like that, and then dictionaries. That's essentially the fundamentals of JSON. So it's just a format for primitive types, and there's a pretty one-to-one conversion between it and Python syntax. Although, as you can see here, it threw in double quotes for me. Technically, single quotes are valid JSON syntax as well, but it was automatically converted for me. So with this format, it's super easy to process it between different applications, because most software, or most languages and I guess software, have ways to interpret it. So with JavaScript, I can easily parse this into the JavaScript data types, which I think they're called dictionaries still, and I guess it would be, they might call it arrays. I'm not sure what they call their lists. I haven't thought about that. But it parses it into the JavaScript data type so you can manipulate it. And because it's so convenient to parse and generate between different applications, it's just kind of one of the standards for sending data between applications, especially in web development. If you work with any API pretty much, like you can go look at the Twitter API or something and make some requests, and I think you'll see you get a lot of JSON. Actually, I'm not sure about that. Some of the bigger ones, you normally interact with them through libraries, but definitely smaller services, they'll send you JSON. And I'm pretty sure those libraries are interacting with some JSON endpoints themselves. So yeah, the purpose of all these endpoints is to either receive or send JSON data. So API channel, this one's just going to return all of the messages from that channel. So all I have to do is do return JSONify, and then channels, channel ID. So if I restart the server and go over here and do channel/C1, you can see the messages, hey, hello, and C2, which are from here. So now I have to do this endpoint. I'll do sent message, sent message equals request.json. So this will extract using the JSON attribute of request, which is actually coming from up here. This is, I believe, technically an object within Flask that is just updated depending on whatever the current request is that's being handled. So when you use it here, it's using the request from within this context of someone sending something to the send message endpoint. So you can take a look at the JSON in the request. So this is JSON that our JavaScript code that I haven't written yet will send. And then I'm just taking that, and it comes automatically parsed into the Python data types instead of being a string, even though it's transmitted as a string itself. So from that, I can do channel equals send message channel. So the data here is going to look something like channel, let's say C1, name DaFluffyPotato, message, and that'll be hello. So it's going to look something like that. Channel name message, that's pretty much all there is. So you could almost directly insert it in, but you don't want to do that. So I'm going to write up a couple more things and I'll tell you why. So message data equals, you do message send message message. Name, sent message, name, and then time. So I'll timestamp all the messages coming in. I do need to import the time library for that, so import time. So I'm creating the message data, which is message name and the time that it was created, which is the timestamp of whenever it's processed. So this just gets the current epoch time, so the seconds since whatever it was, like 1970, I think. And then I can do channels, channel, dot append message data. It'll probably be like 20 minutes before you get to see this actually in use. Return JSONify, and it doesn't matter what I put here because the JavaScript will not need to even read this because this endpoint's just for sending data. But every request, even if you're sending data, still has to have a sending and receiving side, or receiving and sending, depending on how you're looking at it. So yeah, I have to send something back, even if it's not going to be looked at. So what I want to point out here is that when you're taking in data like this is one of the main points of exploitation or hacking. And you don't want to be keeping any of the fields that you're not using, because someone could go in and send in all these different fields with extra data that you don't want. And while I'm at it, you also don't want to allow people to put whatever they want in these messages either, because it's going to be showing up in someone's web browser. So one of the main concerns here would be someone putting in some HTML tags or something to, like, for example, the script tag to run some code, and for example they could send a message that redirects everyone looking at all the messages to another website. So that's something you have to be careful about. So I'm going to just do, this is clean function string return string that replace, this is sloppy, there we go. And yeah, you just replace twice, move the opening, I don't even, what a less than sign and greater than sign, so that people can't make HTML tags. So then when you take this data, you don't need to do it here, because this is just determining where things get added, and if this channel doesn't exist, it'll just error out. So it doesn't really matter what's in that string. But you can clean here. You want to clean the message going in and the name, because that also shows up. So you want to remove all the HTML tags that someone may have thrown in there, and then you add it to our list of messages. So this is going to change. Well, first of all, I'm going to swap our defaults here. I am not going to type this out by hand, but this is a bunch of stuff for testing purposes, and I'll explain in a moment here. So I'm pasting this in. Don't freak out. It's just data. It's not code. Well, technically it's code, but the purpose is data. So I swapped all the channels. So we have a food channel, a games channel, a potato channel, and then these are the messages inside them. So name and message, time, etc. So that each one of these blocks here is a message. So it's just a bunch of data in as lists, dictionaries, and just primitive Python types that can be directly converted to JSON. It's pretty much the same format as before. It's just that instead of the messages just being raw text, they're now their own dictionary with their own attributes, which is what we're going to need. So I have all these testing messages in here. Realistically, and this will be in the next video, I think. I'll be adding a database system, so you don't store your stuff in code like this, and you wouldn't write something like this. Instead, you'll be interfacing with a database. But for testing purposes right now, as I'm setting things up, this is fine. So I have all my messages and channels in here, and that's what's being added to here. So now, if I reset the server, I can go here. Channel 2 doesn't exist anymore. You get internal server error if you do that. You could add some exception handling and say not found or something, but I'm too lazy to do that right now. So I'll go to the food channel, and you can see all the messages that were created by this endpoint, which just pulls out all the JSON from that channel. And we get all of our messages, you can see it's just the stuff from the food channel, which is just this. And then if I do channels, you get the 3 channels. So now it's time to hook that up with the website. So I'll do channel food. So you'll hear it still says channel 1, channel 2, and it doesn't have the right messages. Time to hook stuff up there. Yeah. Also, I should add, I'm not like doing a fully comprehensive clean on the inputs here. This is actually not safe to run itself, which is why I'm not going to be setting this up as a publicly accessible website for you guys to mess around with. But like, for example, I'm not checking to see how much data is in this. And I don't have rate limits for people sending messages. These are all types of issues you would have to deal with if you're making some sort of actual website you're putting on the internet. I'm going to show you how to put everything on the internet and stuff, but I'm not going to go through every single type of issue you'd have to deal with. There's a reason why there's so much work that goes into actual applications like Discord and stuff, even though it may seem simple. Or, well, that's just part of the reason. There's a lot of effort you have to put into just security when developing things, which I am not accounting for here. With the exception of this, because that's important to know. There's all sorts of other types of injection people can do as well, and things like SQL injection, but I'm not doing SQL, I'm going to be doing Mongo, but even then you have to be careful about injection. I encourage you to look into the security side of things a bit yourself, because I'm not an expert in that area. My rule of thumb is to just kind of avoid dealing with sensitive data to begin with, so that if something gets compromised, it's fine, but I still have to be careful about HTML injection, where someone might put something on their website that could harm other users. So that kind of cleaning is still necessary, the type of stuff I'm doing here. Also, I should add, if you're ever going to do anything with user authentication, do not make your own libraries for that. Use existing ones, because if you make one yourself, you're going to mess stuff up, and it's not going to be pretty. Flask has some built-in stuff for that, which I won't be going over in this series. So anyways, I've got all of my endpoints set up here. It's time to do some JavaScript magic. So I have my JavaScript file here that's linked into the other stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is just try to update the messages that are shown here to be the actual messages from the channel. So first I'm going to need a function to make requests to the server. So I'm going to make a getJSON function, so a URL and a callback. So something important you need to know about JavaScript is that a lot of stuff is done asynchronously and stuff, so there's a lot of functions that will later call other functions when they're done, stuff like that. It's standard practice, and a lot of libraries will kind of force you to use this, or just a lot of functionality in general will force you to do this. You're going to need to set up callbacks and stuff. So a callback is just a function that gets called when the current operation is done. So I'm going to make a request object of the new XML HTTP request. So it's just a new request object for making requests. I don't know how else to say that. Request.open, and I'm going to make a get request at the URL and true. So if you put false there, that's going to be an asynchronous request, but as I checked, that's deprecated, so you can't actually put false there anymore. So request.onload, so you're modifying a property of the request object. So far this is not too far from Python syntax, but this is where things get weird. I'm going to make an anonymous function, which is kind of like lambda in Python, and as close as it gets pretty much, but it's just a function with no name, and I'm just assigning this attribute to the function itself. I'm not calling the function here, I'm just saying, I'm just pointing this attribute to a function I'm making that has no name. So I wouldn't be able to use this function anywhere else, but I'm just assigning it here. For anonymous functions, you can put your arguments you want to take in here, and then you just do this, and then everything inside these braces will run. Also, this is technically a statement, so I would put a semicolon there. So if request.status is 200, so if everything is all good, I do callback, so this is this callback, json.parse request.response. So I take the response from the request, which remember, this code's not being executed right now. I'm just giving a function to this attribute. This attribute will be used to run whatever's inside of it once the request finishes. So this is all asynchronous. So I'm just setting things up and then telling it what to do when it's done, essentially. So when it's done, I want to call my callback here, and I'll give it the parse JSON data of this. So this is just a string, and then I take this request a response. So that would be over here. If I try to duplicate that, I'll do API, and I'll do channels or that, whatever. Here, I'm gonna give it food. So it'll take this data and parse it as the JavaScript primitives instead of just a string, so you can manipulate it. That's what this does. And then I send it to the callback function, and this argument here itself is a function. It's not some primitive value, it's another function. So you're doing a lot of passing on functions here, which can be confusing if you're just new to programming in general, but that's just kind of how it is. So essentially what this is all saying is, once this is done loading, call this function with the JavaScript that I got from the request. But the thing is, I haven't actually sent the request yet. I've just set it up and told it what to do when it's done. So I have to do request.send to send the request. I just give it null. So this is pretty much the whole function I need for getting JSON from an endpoint. So I'm going to wrap that with something else to update my messages. So function refresh messages, and I'll do var current channel equals window.location.href.split slash, and then current channel equals current channel dot length minus 1. So this is a bit wonky, different from what you're used to in Python. So the split is the same, actually. I'm taking the string of the current URL, I'm splitting it by the slash, so it's a list now with all of the different elements. So it would be, let's see, for here it would be API. Well, it would be actually this thing. Then it would be API and channel and food. So the last element of that list would be food. So in JavaScript, there is no, you can't just do -1 to grab the last item, like you can in Python, which is one of the things I hate about JavaScript. You have to say the length of the list or array, I'm not sure what JavaScript calls them, and then the -1 to grab the last element because this index is started at 0. So this just gets the current channel you're on from the URL. And then I can do get JSON, which is the function I just created, and I'll do API channel, and then I'll give it the current channel. So for example, if I'm on channel food, it'll take this thing and then it'll go to this page, API channel food. So it'll get this data, parse it as JSON. So I do have to still give this a callback, which I'm going to do update message HTML. So once it receives it, it's going to call update message HTML, and it's going to pass it the data. So I'll go up here and I'll do function update message HTML, and it'll take the message data. Also, something I should add, in JavaScript it's standard practice to use camel case rather than snake tail like Python. You use the underscore between words in a variable. In JavaScript you just capitalize words. At first, when I started with JavaScript, and you can probably see this in some of my code for some of my projects, but I would force snaketail into JavaScript, and it doesn't work out when you're having to use functions like, let's see, I guess most of these here are fine, but this one right here, you wouldn't write that like that in Python. Except for the fact that I guess it's sort of an object. So I guess nothing in here would stand out as being odd, but when you start dealing with built-in functionality and stuff, and you'll see some stuff in a bit when I start manipulating the HTML in the web page, But if you start mixing snaketail, it starts looking funky. So it's just better to go with the standard for the language, which is camel case. So var messages element equals document.get element by ID messages. So JavaScript allows you, since it's meant for scripting the client in a web browser, it's got some built-in functions for actually a built-in object. There's a lot of stuff built in that you don't like have to import and stuff like that, like you would in Python. So document just kind of refers to the entire web page or the contents of it. So I'm just saying, in the contents of the web page, get the element with the ID messages. So if you go to messaging.html, my layout here, I've got messages, which is this div. It has the ID messages, so it'll return just this. It doesn't return it as a string, it returns it as a DOM object, which is something else. A DOM object has all sorts of functionality and stuff built in, so you can manipulate it easier. So I have the messages element. One thing I want to add in here, actually. So var last messages equals that, and I want to say if JSON.stringify, and I'm just converting this object back into a string. Message data does not equal last messages. So this is just checking, hey, is the contents of whatever the response to my request was different from this variable? And if it is, I'm going to do last messages equals JSON.stringify message data. So all this does here is it runs whatever's in these braces here only when the response I get from the server is different from whatever it last saw. So that will be either the first time you request it or anytime stuff changes. This is important because you don't want to be updating the contents of that element non-stop. You just want to make a bunch of requests and then only update it if it changed, because there's some side effects you get if you're updating it non-stop. It's rather annoying, especially when developing things. So the first thing I'm going to do is, if it did change, I'm going to wipe the contents of the messages element. And to be clear, the messages element is this section on the web page, this box actually. So I'm going to wipe the contents of it. So messages element.inner HTML equals that. So the HTML inside of it is just now nothing. And I'm going to do the JavaScript equivalent of a Python for loop here. There's multiple ways to do this, but I prefer this anyways. So for const message of message data. So if you look over here, I'm looping over every single individual message here because it's a list. At the top level, it's a list, so I'm looping over every message and getting each one. So var new message equals document.create element div. So this is creating a DOM object, which is one of those JavaScript elements that can be manipulated that represents some amount of HTML. So this just represents, it would be just div/div. So that's all the HTML represents, but it's easier to manipulate this way when you create an object like that. So new message.inner HTML equals, I'll do b class equals message name plus message name, and b, I need a space, plus message. So I'm updating the inner HTML here, which means I'm placing text inside of the div. So it's going to be a bold thing with the class message name and then just the message text. So it's the name of the user who posted the message and whatever they said. So I create that element, I put the stuff in there, but I haven't done anything with the element to put it on the web page. So it's just kind of in memory. I haven't done anything with it yet. But first I'm going to do one more thing. So new message.classList.add message. So I'm adding the message class to the div I just created. And then messages element. So remember that's referring to this entire box here. Dot append child new message. So I'm adding the new message is essentially an HTML to the or the DOM object, which is a representation of HTML to that element. So this will actually add it to the page inside of this box. So one last thing here I'm going to do, messages lm.lastChild.scroll into view. So this will just make sure that whatever the last message that was added will be visible. Because when you add it, you're adding to the bottom. And well, I haven't made this element scrollable yet, but I will when I modify the CSS again in a moment. But I'm going to want it to automatically scroll to the bottom so you can see the latest message whenever there's a new message. So when you send one or someone else sends one. So that's what I need for that. I've written almost 50 lines of code and I haven't run anything. That's how tutorials go. So I'm going to just call refresh messages, which remember, it essentially goes through all of these functions I just created and runs them. I don't think I have to refresh the website, so I can just Control-Shift-R. There we go. So I'm surprised I didn't make any mistakes there. But you can see it got all the messages. There are some issues here that I'm going to have to fix. But it got all the correct messages. So there's food. And if I go to games, you get that. And then if I go to, what was the last one? Potato. I get that. I'm going to make some CSS changes though. So first of all, I want the text on a different line from the name. I want some spacing in between the messages, and then I want the messages to highlight when I hover them. So totally not ripping off Discord. So let's pull up the CSS. So I have no message CSS in here at the moment. So I'm going to add some specific rules for messages. So message, I'll do margin 6 pixels, 0 pixels, padding 4 pixels. Also, I should add that the standard practice is not to use pixels as your measurement like this. I'm just doing it out of convenience. Dot message name, display, block. So this is taking the name of the user who posted the message and making it a block element instead of an inline element. Because if you look, bold, this is inside a bold tag, which you saw me write earlier. Bold is by default inline, so it'll appear in the same line as whatever's coming after it or before it. If I make it block, it'll separate it onto its own line, give it some other properties. Like div is inherently block. That'll move it onto its own line. This will space out the messages. And border radius you can't see yet until I do dot message hover. So when your mouse hovers it, background color is going to be 2F3447. So things look a bit better now, and I can hover the different messages and it highlights. I'm actually going to add some padding. Oh, I did. Wait, should be padding on the left. Not sure what happened there. Interesting. I'm going to take a look at the box model. Oh, it only padded vertically. Interesting. Wait, how did it get 3? So the margin is correct, but it's still got a padding of 3. Oh, it's being overwritten by, where did I put dot message? That's right here. Gonna get rid of that. Refresh this now, and now that's correct. Bit of debugging for you. So now they all highlight properly, and the formatting is correct. I can go to like games, and yep, it's being filled in with the JavaScript. Highlighting is good. So I can view all the messages for different channels, but there's still a few more steps to do here. So I want to change a couple things here. I want to do height is 70 VH. So this is for the messages box that contains all the messages. That's going to be 70% of the viewport's height. So 70% of your window's height. And overflow Y scroll. So anything that goes past that height will require a scroll bar, and so you can scroll around. But I'm going to do MS overflow style none, and I'll do scroll bar width none, and these will remove the scroll bar. But that only is, the funny thing is you see there's two separate things here. This one does it for the Microsoft stuff like Internet Explorer and Edge. This one does it for Firefox. And you'll see this happens with a lot of CSS stuff where you have to use different properties to deal with different web browsers because they work differently. So I'll also do .messages WebKit scroll bar and display none. And that's how you deal with it on Chrome browsers, and I believe that should include Brave, which is what I'm using right now because it's based on Chromium. So if I actually just had these two, I think it would still see a scroll bar on my end. Not sure. But that'll hide the scroll bar, and it'll make it so it's scrollable. So you can still use the scroll wheel to scroll around to it. You just won't be able to see the scroll bar because it's kind of ugly. It's bad UI practice. I really just want to make it look different, but I want to deal with it. Anyways, I can go back here, and you'll see the height is extended. So there's all this space for extra messages, which you can't see yet. I'll demonstrate how this scrolls later. So the next step is to make these channels link to the actual channels. So this one is going to be a bit easier than what we just did before. Down here, I'm going to do, actually wait, there's one more thing I forgot. So I'm going to do, set interval, refresh messages 500. So this will make it call the refresh messages function every 500 milliseconds, so every half second. So because right now I only have it getting the latest messages when I reload the page. So I want it to continuously do that. So if there are more messages, it'll update pretty much immediately. Although you can't see it right now because I have no way to add new messages. But what you can see is you can see it making a ton of requests here, and you'll see that scroll by as I go here. Anyways though, so I'm going to do get JSON API channels, which is the page that just has the list of channels. I'll do update channel list, function update channel list, and then I want the list of channels. I'm going to need the current channel when I do this, so I know which one's the channel I'm actually on. So document.get element by ID channels inner HTML equals that. So I'm just wiping the channels channel element, which is this bar up here. So I'll have nothing inside it. For const channel of channels, loop over all the elements of the list of channels. Var new channel equals document.create element A. So that A is a link. New channel.text equals the # plus the channel's ID. New channel.href. So these attributes here are pretty much the attributes in HTML. Actually, I don't think that's one of them. That's essentially just the contents. But href, hold on, do I have an A? There's no A here. Here's one. It's that href. So there's also new channel.style as well, which you can modify to change some visual stuff. Anyways, I'm going to set this link to channel / and the channel ID. New channel.class list.add channel name. So add the channel name class to this new element. If channel is current channel. So if the channel I'm creating the element for is the one that I'm actually currently on, new channel.style.text decoration equals underline. So I want the channel that I'm currently on to be underlined so that you know when you're looking at the list here which one you're on. So, well, these aren't the actual ones, but it would underline food since I'm on it. And then I have to add the element. Document.get element by ID channels. Append child new channel. So add that element, and that's pretty much that. I do want to update the CSS again, though. So channel name, I'm going to change the CSS quite a bit. So color, inherit, because I have to overwrite the... Actually, I'll show you what's going on first. So if I go here, Control-Shift-R. Oh, wait, what? Hold on. Did I make a mistake? Hold on. Oh, did I not call it? Hold on. Well, I think I did. I did call it. Let's see if there's an error. No inner HTML of null. Oh, right. There's a typo here. That was supposed to be channels, not channel. So now you see food, games, potato. So I can actually switch between them with these. But that looks horrible. And that's because it's inheriting the styling of the link element. So I have to fix that. Because before it was just text, and now it's a link, so it inherits all that stuff, like the blue and purple color in the underline. So color inherit, I'm going to inherit from the element above, which is just that white color. Text decoration, none. Hide the underline that comes with the links, but that will be overwritten for the selected channel by this. The style element of the HTML overwrites the inherent CSS. Font weight, bold. I want to make that bold. Margin, 0 pixels, 12 pixels. So it just has a horizontal margin to space out the different elements because they're too close together. So now it looks like this. Food, games, potato. And that looks a lot better. So I think it's almost done. I can see the messages. I can switch between the different channels. But I can't send messages, so this is the fun part. So as you can see, this is a get function. If you look in our script over here, well, these two are get endpoints, but this is a post endpoint. So I need to use a post request instead of a get request. So I'll make another function in the JavaScript so I can send JavaScript instead of receiving JavaScript. Oh, sorry, so I can send JSON instead of receiving JSON. Function send JSON. URL and JSON, so the data I want to send. Actually, no, let's call this post JSON because it's a post request. Post JSON var request equals new XML HTTP request open, make it a post request at the URL, make it asynchronous. Request.set request header content type application/JSON. So this just tells the server that this data I'm sending is JSON data and not just plain text. So request.send JSON.stringify JSON. So this just converts the JSON data that I have that I want to send into a string and then actually sends it. I actually don't care about the response here, so I don't have to set up the onload thing with the callback to parse it and everything. I just have to send it. So this one's a bit easier than the other one. So it's time for the wonky stuff over here. So function send message. This is a function I will call whenever I want to send some message. So I have to do var message equals document dot get element by ID message input dot value. So if you look in here, I have this input field called well, with the ID message input, and is there no value? I guess not. You can actually put value in here and it'll fill it in automatically with some text. Placeholder does the same thing, except it goes away when you click it, and technically it's not the value. You can see that it says type here, but if I actually type something, it disappears. So when I type stuff in here, it shows up under the value attribute of that object. So the dot value of this input field becomes AAAA. If I inspect, you can see it's that input field. So go back here. This just gets the value of that input field, so in that case AAAA, puts it in a string. So if message is an empty string, return, because I don't want to send an empty message. Like if the user clicks send or presses enter without typing anything, it shouldn't send a message to the server and update everything. Like for example, you can't send an empty message in Discord. I'll do the current channel thing, because I need to know what channel I'm on so that I can tell the server what channel I'm sending this to. var message data equals, and then these are the fields I talked about earlier. So channel, current channel, name. I'll do DaFluffyPotato for now. I might do a video at the end of the series where I add a thing where you can change your name, but that's not super necessary to mess with now. It'll just default to my name. Message equals the message contents, which were pulled from the input field. So you create that object, and then you just do post JSON API send message, and then message data. So you're sending this object to the server so that it can deal with it as a new message. Document.get element by ID message input, and then value equals an empty string. So that will wipe the contents of the input box. So you press send and it empties out. So to have this all set up properly, I do have to go over to the button here and do on click and then send message. So this is saying when this button's clicked, run this JavaScript code, whatever's in here, and in this case it's running JavaScript code to call a JavaScript function, which is from here. So to call the send message function when you click the send button here. So I do have to reload that because I changed the HTML. So AAAA send, and that's the magic of this. So I have a new message. I can duplicate the tab. It's still there. I can go to games, potato, and come back to food. It's still there. I can send BCD, send, and I can come back here and it's here. I can close both of them. I can go to localhost food, and it's still here. But if I restart the server, you'll see it clears because I'm not storing data, and that's what the next video is for. But there's one more thing I want to do here. I want to make it so if I press enter, it sends. This is a fairly common thing people want to do, and I mostly just pulled the code off of Stack Overflow for this. That's kind of how a lot of these things go, because most people don't have that much JavaScript memorized. So down here, I'm going to do document.get element by ID message input on key press. So I'm setting an attribute for this DOM element and hooking this attribute up with an anonymous function. So I'm just having this point to another function that gets called whenever a key is pressed inside this input element. So I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what this is. I think it's some sort of thing to deal with some inconsistencies between different browsers. So if there's no argument given here, then you pull it from window.event, which is a global attribute, which presumably contains the event I'm looking for if it wasn't passed to this function. So I'm guessing that's an inconsistency between browsers, but I didn't bother looking into it. If I can get the key code equals e.code or e.key, I'm guessing this is another inconsistency thing where if it doesn't exist, you just pull the other one. And that might be because you would potentially be getting it from two different places, or it could just be other reasons that it's inconsistent. Either way, you're just looking for the key or code, whichever one exists. If key code is enter, so someone's pressed the enter key, you call send message. So I can go over here, refresh, ABC, press enter, and it sends. And that's mostly it. So I'm actually going to do lorem ipsum, get some magic placeholder text because I need to fill up my box to show the scrolling. Just keep pasting this. So now it scrolls. If I open up another tab, I like how it wants to translate it because there's so much Latin. So I have this extra tab. Man, that's annoying. It automatically scrolls to the bottom so I can actually scroll up and see the older messages. So ABC, hello world. So even if I scroll up on this one, scroll up to the top, and type E, and it scrolls it back down. That's annoying behavior in a practical sense, but I didn't want to deal with all of these special rules for scrolling that you would in an actual chat application, because it's mostly a waste of time for a tutorial like this, since I'm just going over base concepts. But yeah, you can send messages. I can go over to potato and then type potato2, and then go over to potato, and it's still here. But as before, restart the server, and it's gone. Also, I should add that because of the way that this website was set up before, I still have this page, which is linked to all of the different channels I actually have automatically. And I can go to, like, say, food from here, or I can go to games from here. But each channel page links to the other ones anyway, so I don't need to mess with that. I won't bother making the home page fancy, because also kind of a waste of time. It's not teaching new concepts, really. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this part on JavaScript. The recording is almost an hour. I don't know what's going to be after I edit it, but hopefully you've got a decent understanding of using JavaScript here. I was mostly going over making requests to the server and stuff and updating elements. There's all sorts of stuff you can do. There's so many people trying to do stuff with JavaScript that just about every question has been asked. So if you want to do something on a web page, you can just pretty much search how to do X with JavaScript or something like that. So in my case, I did I don't remember what exactly I searched. It's something along the lines of how to run JavaScript when enter is pressed in an input field or something like that. And of course, there's a Stack Overflow answer for that, and I got the code I needed, so that I can type here and then press enter, and it runs some JavaScript code, even though that's not like an inherent ability of that HTML element. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this part. Next time, I'll probably be going over how to work with a database, and that video will be a lot shorter than this one, hopefully. I'll be using MongoDB, and it should be pretty easy. Hopefully, I'll see you guys later.